we'll get started. So I'd just like to say good evening. My name's Kate Coffey and I'm from Riverine Plains in Mawela. And I'd like to welcome everyone to our drought preparation webinar series. So this is a project that's supported by the FRRR through funding from the Australian Government Future Drought Fund. So the aim of these webinars is to discuss and brainstorm some drought preparation strategies with input from our speakers. So tonight we have Adrian Clancy, who is a grain marketer with Farmanco, and Glen and Fiona Baxter, who are farmers at Drought. As we're going through the presentation, if you think of any questions while our speakers are talking, if you could please put them in the Q&A box that's at the bottom of your screen. If you just hover down the bottom of your screen, you'll see Q&A. So if you can pop those questions in there, and then my colleague, who I'd like to introduce to you, I'm not sure which part of the screen she's on, but I'd just like to introduce Rhiannon McPhee, who's the newest member of our team at Riverine Plains. Rhiannon will facilitate the questions after we have a chat with our speakers tonight. Also at the end of the session, there will be a survey. So if you could take 5 minutes to fill that out at the end, we'd appreciate that. So without further ado, I'd like to introduce our first speaker, who is Adrian Clancy, grain marketer with Farmanco. Adrian, can you just give me a little background to your role with Farmanco?
Pretty much my role is in facilitation, pretty much, in grain marketing for clients, Kate. So part of my day pretty much sort of starts looking at the market, and at one point, you know, it was probably a lot in international, but a lot of it's domestic markets, looking at local, the market values, communicating with a lot of buyers, and then looking to sell grain. But more so with clients, it's developing a bit of a strategy of what crops they're growing, which markets they're targeting, whether we're looking to sell in the system or on farm, whether we've got the infrastructure to deliver grain, whether they've got other requirements to be able to manage. Then it sort of works through to harvest. It's being able to understand what commodities are coming off, which markets they suit, how they'll work in contracts, and any sort of ability to arbitrage contracts on grade spreads and those sorts of things. And then it's also throughout the year looking at opportunities where we see values pick up prior to or during or post-harvest. So like I probably sort of said, it predominantly it's around that facilitation. It's being able to assist and it's being able to share that sort of information with growers. It's not a claiming to be, to be able to know everything, because I think any person who's trying to tell you that they know exactly where the market is and how it's going to move is probably got a bit of a lens. You can definitely make an educated decision on a certain amount of information, but ultimately, like we've sort of seen over this year, markets will be led from a range of different drivers. So it's being able to look and analyse those and to feed that information, but also to fulfil growers' targets as far as what they want to achieve out of what they're doing. And that might be tax management, it might be utilising truck infrastructure, it might be just simply being able to sell all at harvest, it might be utilising storage, it might be moving things at different times of the year, particularly where we're sort of dealing with summer and sort of winter crops. So that's pretty much sort of how the role works.
Thanks, Adrian. And just from what I'm hearing, it sounds like it's a real relationship that you manage with the individual farmers, and basically getting to know their needs in terms of what products they're actually marketing, as well as their infrastructure, their cash flow needs and their tax needs. So it's more than actually just selling the grain. It's actually having that relationship. So I think that's very important when we do get into the discussion around drought preparation, because I think what we're seeing a lot at these meetings, it's important to have those relationships in different aspects of your business and to get those people to help you with that planning side. So just on the topic of drought, Adrian, obviously now we're in a really positive grain market situation and we've got good seasonal conditions and things are looking quite optimistic. However, casting our minds back to the last droughts, which weren't that long ago, from a marketing perspective and what you've seen, what sort of things worked in terms of marketing grain in those drought years?
Well, basically, the number one thing is really understanding around risks and appetites for risk. Some growers will have an appetite for risk and will look to do things forward. It's not something I'd necessarily push, but at different times we see those opportunities. So in that regard, it's definitely being able to manage and monitor crop. If you're looking at issues around drought and how that's going to impact production, being able to back off any forward contracts. But also in regard, the other thing we tend to see in drought is frost. So it's something that can happen quite readily and will impact yield heavily. So being able to monitor and manage those sorts of factors is definitely something around drought that to be proactive on. But ultimately around drought, it's resilience. So it's being, it's business resilience, which is obviously something we can work on throughout the good times. And it's diverse. There's a certain amount of diversification. Too much diversification can impact a business negatively, but being able to utilise on-farm storage, being able to move grain ex-farm, being able to have grain in the system, all those sorts of things relative to the business strategies that work fairly well in a drought scenario. It also depends on the business as far as, whether there's livestock within the business or whether it's entirely cropping. What sort of stocks need to be held on farm in order to be able to maintain, a maintenance level for livestock. Those sorts of factors are all sort of important things to be able to review in a business. So, and probably even going back, you're talking about relationship. The other big one around that is understanding in the relationship what different clients' risk profiles are. Whether they've got an inclination, whether they can sleep with the idea of forward committed grain or whether they're more comfortable being able to. And that's probably the other lesson we learned from the drought as well, particularly in these markets, that capacity to be able to hold grain post-harvest is a lower risk option. So then you're working on the price risk rather than production risk, and therefore getting away from forward committing grain prior to harvest. And again, like we've seen in the last few years, there's strong advantages in being able to hold that grain and waiting for the price signals to be able to market. Again, getting away from that production and forward committing to a price and then hoping to be able to fulfill it.
So basically, one of the things you've said that we've learnt is there's different appetites for different farmers of how much grain they're wanting to commit forward, and there is that risk associated with it. And you're also saying that by having the grain storage, you can actually carry over that grain and not require as much selling of grain for cash flow because you've sort of carried over the previous year. So the grain storage, is that what you're saying? The grain storage can help manage that risk?
That's right. Keeping in mind that if we can forward commit in a season where we're unable to fill due to drought and there's a production issue, we've got to then buy back that contract in a simple term. So therefore, if we're in a drought scenario and the cost of that grain increases, it can very heavily impact a business. So therefore, avoiding that forward commitment and being able to market post-harvest, avoids that sort of detriment. Obviously, it also impacts cash flow, then being able to hold it for a later period of time. But definitely that's the one thing. And again, you sort of got to work for different businesses around that risk profile. It depends on the season and, appetite for that, managing that risk as well.
So Adrian, thanks for that. And it sounds like there's a lot of factors there to manage during a drought. Not just only the selling the grain, but there's also maybe potentially the impact of frost and making that decision or having to wash out contracts, whether you've got livestock and how that impacts. So it sounds like it's very much a horses for courses, and each individual farmer will be different, but there's some sort of common themes coming through in terms of risk management and doing that in terms of your grain marketing. So now that we are having a reasonably good season, potentially record grain prices, soil moisture is good, so potentially another good harvest, although we shouldn't be counting our chickens. What do you think, like, say things do progress well this year, what sort of things should farmers be thinking about that they can do now, given we've had sort of the last good year and potentially another good year? What sort of things could they be doing now in terms of marketing to start preparing for future droughts and future climatic events that may be adverse?
Well, I think the one that people refer to a lot is sort of having the capacity to be able to hold grain on farm.
Yeah.
Some level of on-farm storage is beneficial. It's just as to where that threshold is. Some businesses are very good with that capacity and can really sort of leverage that benefit out of it. Others are good to have a smaller percentage of on-farm and to be able to utilise the likes of, you know, a bulk handling system like the Grain Flows and Grain Corps. And they may have other opportunities to invest in on-farm production, and it might be agronomic, it might be those sorts of things. So it probably really depends on the business as far as, you know, where they invest the money. And like I sort of allude, that on-farm storage does provide a benefit to a business, but again, it comes down to how it's managed and what sort of investment somebody wants to make, because it's not just the storage, it's the infrastructure around it. It's whether it's you've got augers and outloading, and then you've got to be able to have somebody there to unload and to load trucks and those sorts of things. So sometimes, yeah, it really sort of depends on that business, what they want to do about it. But and therefore, you know, investing in agronomic and being able to get the most out of the soil may be a better option. So again, it's probably that sort of horses for courses scenario. But business resilience and probably a diversification around the marketing. A marketing plan is probably a fair part of that.
So I suppose what you're saying is grain storage and expanding that capacity is an option, one of the tools farmers could use to prepare for future droughts, but there is some other factors that you need to consider in terms of extra labour, maybe having, you know, weigh bridges and extra machinery. It's not just putting in an extra silo. There's a fair bit of cost that goes with that.
That's right, yeah.
Yeah. And Adrian, what are you seeing farmers, what are you seing out in where you're working in terms of what farmers are doing now in terms of that preparation?
I do see a certain amount of that investment in infrastructure, but I also see, you know, there's investment in new agricultural equipment, new seeding gear, those sorts of things, and you do see where that gives that benefit as well, getting a good germination, being able to utilise soil moisture, therefore increases the chance of getting a crop in dry seasons, and therefore, you know, greater potential to get a crop in those dry seasons. So whilst I always look at, you know, the sealed storage is great afterwards, that investment in the land, and particularly with the value of land, is a pretty solid sort of investment. You know, to be able to get in your crop in dry seasons or poorer seasons as well. So seeing a bit of that.
Great, thanks, Adrian, and really insightful on that marketing perspective. And I think it is a massive part of grain businesses as well as livestock. So, and something probably, you know, it's great to hear your thoughts, given you're dealing with that all the time. So, and I'm sure there's heaps of questions. I've got a few myself, but what we'll do is we'll just hand over to Fiona and Glen and do a few questions with them, and then we'll hand over to the audience to ask some questions. So, Glen, I'm just going to, can you unmute yourself? And I'll just mute you.
Yep. Hang on. We on?
Yep, you're on. Yep. So, Glen, thank you very much for coming along tonight. I'd just like to introduce yourself and Fiona, farmers from Jerilderie. Thank you very much for coming tonight when you haven't been 100%. Glen, are you able to give us a bit of a background to your farming operation?
Yeah, sure. So Namarang is a irrigation and dryland farming property comprising of about 13,500 hectares. We currently have 11,000 hectares of winter crop not quite finished, still getting finished off now, comprising of wheat, barley and canola. The wheat being mostly Scepter and Durum barley Spartacus, and on the canola side, it's mostly Roundup Ready varieties with a bit of Bonito TT and Clearfield. We also brought vetch into the program about 12 months ago, and that's relatively new, and it doubles as a break crop as well as livestock feed. The other pulse we have in there is Faber Beans, which is more on the irrigation side and works well with the corn, and we often plant that after corn, and it also gives us a break crop under the lateral move irrigators to help sort out some ryegrass, followed up by canola. On the irrigation side, about 20 years ago, we used to grow a lot of rice, but we've moved away from that and into corn and cotton. The maize is predominantly 1756 and 1837 are the two varieties, and they're grown on both beds and under lateral move irrigators. Under the laterals, it's sown after canola is harvested, and the yields for the maize tend to be between 12 and 18 tonnes to the hectare. 18 we've struck this year, which is the best yield we've ever achieved, but that was just in a 44 hectare paddock. The cotton is all FRRR or Roundup Ready, and 3 varieties. The ginning now can take place at Rivcot, which is a grower-owned gin up near Carrathul, or between Darlington Point and Hay. And we grow a little bit of sorghum, which is a male and female set up for hybrid seed for Pioneer Seeds. Onto the equipment that everybody likes talking about. We run John Deere tractors with Green Star auto steer, which has been a change. We used to run a lot of red tractors with Trimble auto steer. We run a Boss Tyne seeder and an NDF disc. We run Case IH headers and Case IH boom sprays. The minor equipment, Coon spreaders and Dunstan chaser bins. That's the basis of the overview.
Great, thanks, Glenn. That's a really interesting and diversified setup that you have. It seems like you've got a bit of everything. Just out of interest, Glenn, how many employees do you have?
Look, full-time, probably 10 to 12 on the farm. But it does swell to as many as 25 if we could find them. But like everybody at the moment, that's pretty hard. We're definitely short-staffed at the moment. So, but we're getting there. Yeah.
I think everyone's in that boat at the moment and causing a fair few grey hairs to the people who are just winter cropping. So imagine people that are double cropping, there's more grey hairs.
Yes.
So Glenn, I was interested when I spoke to you a while back about your business and how you've responded to sort of previous droughts and water shortages within your business.
Yep. So there's a few things we've done over time. I wouldn't say it's all in preparation for drought, of course, but it's just diversification and which helps with the ups and downs, I suppose. So years ago, as I spoke about before, we went away from rice, which was using 15 to 20 megalitres a hectare, and into maize, which traditionally is probably used 7 to 9, depending on the irrigation methods. And from there, it was a pretty straightforward move into bringing cotton into that system, which is more a 9-10 megalitre user in our area, but still it's around half or a bit more than half of what our rice country was using. So that was a straightforward change to help with, the way the water situation is and irrigation and the direction that's heading in. So we also have farms spread across 2 main water resource areas, being the Murray and the Murrumbidgee. And that puts us in 4 different irrigation schemes as well, being Murray irrigation, Berrigan, Murrumbidgee and Colliambly irrigation. Changes that we made include the development of different efficient water use layouts. This includes spray irrigation, high flow furrow irrigation, and dams to hold the post-irrigation runoff and also help us carry water over from one season to the next. One thing that a drought does do for us in irrigation side of things is allow us to develop and enhance some of our irrigation areas that's been full of water for a prolonged period of time and in full production. So, yeah, I guess that's, yeah, helps answer that question.
So what you're saying is because it was dry, you could reform. Is that what you're saying?
Yeah, well,
yeah.
we've learned over the years, I suppose, that because when things are good and water's cheaper and available, you have to go as hard as you can, particularly now, because the opportunity isn't there probably as often as it used to be when I was a kid. So there's some water's obviously going back to the environment, but you've also got a lot more players in the water market, just in the farming side of things. The demand for people see the value and what it can do. So there's plenty of corporates and other family businesses like ourselves have developed their irrigation further, which just uses the resource a lot quicker. So if you're not in it when the opportunity's there to start with, you can miss out pretty quick, because water can change from $50 a megalitre to 300 in a matter of months, and you can be priced out of production. So
basically what you're saying is you need to, when the water is at those levels where it's quite economic, you've basically got to take those opportunities because it may not be there forever.
Correct. Yeah.
Yeah. So you've basically got to go full noise when it's available.
Yeah. So that's one of our strategies of helping through the leaner times, is just make the most of the good times.
Yeah. That's a great strategy and I think in dryland or irrigated, to make the most of those good years, which we've had a couple of. So
yes, absolutely.
Speaking of dryland, Glenn, obviously dryland's a big side of your business as well. In terms of the dryland side, what sort of things have you been doing to adapt to sort of the droughts or the drier seasons within the dryland scenario?
Well, I wouldn't say there's been a lot of changes in that side of the business. As I said before, we go hard in the good times and find a way to hold on and hold together during the dry times, I guess. Our timing of sowing to some degree will change depending on the moisture in the subsoil. If it's very dry and there's no subsoil moisture and there's a poor forecast outlook, we may well sow a small amount of canola and then change into something else or pull up for a while. We'll throw our seed and fertilizer rates around a bit, and just, yeah, I guess with a big program though, we can't just do nothing, because it can suddenly change and you can be on the back foot pretty quickly. So it's we tend to probably just keep sowing and get it done in the past, but you have just got to keep a close eye on the weather, and because I mean canola seed, particularly Roundup Ready, etc., is very expensive now, and fertilizer, as we know, is $1,600 a ton. It's input costs have almost doubled, I would say, in 2 years. So going forward, we're going to have to be a little bit more careful about how we go about that. Yes. So
do you have any stop-go scenarios? Like, say, for example, you're saying if there's no subsoil moisture, you'll reduce your canola area. What's your guide there? Do you have like, is it just gut feel, or do you look at moisture probes? What's your monitor for that? Is it digging up the ground?
Yeah, so all of that, but much.
Sorry, Glenn, I think Starlink just dropped out. Can you just repeat that last 30 seconds?
Yep, is unstable. Can you hear me yet?
Yeah, I can hear you now.
Righto. Where was I?
About when you decide on, how do you make that decision about
yes.
Yeah, the canola?
Yep. Well, yeah, if we haven't got much subsoil moisture is the basis really to start with. So if it's been a dry spring and dry throughout the summer and it's warm heading into the autumn, it's quite risky to go and sow canola at the start of April with no subsoil moisture and no great rain forecast in the future. So that's really the basis of that decision. So we might hold off, because if it's very dry underneath, you need quite a bit of rain, and it's still quite warm in early April. So we might have to wait till mid or late April to start sowing some of that canola. Yes, so obviously under our spray irrigation, etc., and depending on water price, we'll probably go ahead and do all of those paddocks, and we'll water them up and get them going, which gives us something. So we'll start there and move on to the dryland. Whereas in a year like this year, it's more the opposite. We're happy to start on the dryland while the going's good, and then move to the irrigation. So
it's basically switching your strategy depending on those soil moisture indicators.
Yeah, and we do have moisture probes. Predominantly, they're used in our summer crop and the irrigated winter crop. I have had one probe in dryland in the past, but probably just haven't been quite organised enough to have one in the same spot year after year.
Yeah. So, Glen, given that we've had the good grain prices and the good seasons, is there anything you're implementing now to help your business be more prepared for the future climatic challenges that we are probably likely going to get?
I was just reading my notes. Was that a comment in there? I was just reading my notes, and Fiona's laughing at them. It says nothing special here.
Nothing special.
So we've increased farm grain storage, I should say, that allows us to have better control on our ability to work with the changing markets. So obviously, coming into a drought, you don't always know if it's going to be a dry year. You might get a start, and then you might not get a spring, or you might just dry up in the winter and not run the rest of the year. So obviously, the grain marketing really comes into this part, and probably not going too early and taking fixed positions and swaps, etc. Better off to have that grain storage and know that you've got somewhere to put it, and market it later on when probably the prices are stronger. We do have had a history of storing most of our grain. Some of our canola gets sold at harvest time, delivered direct to local sites and Melbourne, etc. And the rest will go into storage. We've used temporary storage as well as permanent storage, like silos and silo bags and bunkers even last year to store all of that grain. And then some of it's pre-marketed and some of it's not. And we'll just work with that. But obviously we won't have bunkers and silo bags in a dry year, because we're going to be lacking the grain to do so. But
so that's probably where the temporary storage comes in as a flexible option.
Yeah, that's right.
Okay, Glen, that's really interesting. And so what we might do now is I might just open it up to the attendees and I'll just ask Rhiannon to pass me the questions that are going in the Q&A box.
Thanks, Kate. The first one we've got is for Glen. While we've just got him talking, I'll use one that can continue adding on. So using your high value crops such as cotton, has this sort of made the most of what you've got available to you water-wise? Like, is that why you've decided to go on high value, is the first part. And the second part is, have you found diversifying with so many crops a major challenge, or have you had to find some really good advisors and things like that to help you along the way?
So yes, the shift to cotton is to compete in the water market, to be able to continue to use water efficiently and high value. I mean, the next step obviously is nut growers could price even cotton out of the market, believe it or not. There's plenty of them going in around the place, and I guess got to move with the times if we want to keep using that water. And so the second part of the question was...
So how has it been for you to diversify, like with support to change into a new crop?
Yes. It's been challenging for sure. There's no doubt about that. It's just added another crop and another dimension to our business. The cotton now is a lot easier crop to grow than it used to be, say, 20 years ago, pre the round bale picker and Roundup ready cotton. If we didn't have those two technologies, we probably wouldn't be cotton growers, because it'd be too hard, and you need twice the number of staff and machinery, etc.
Right, I have one more question, which was for Adrian. How would you go about talking to a potential new farmer who might be coming into the industry in a drought year about their marketing options, and just sort of that sort of conversation with someone who might not have any idea what it means to market their grain?
Well, number one, it's sort of knowing what crops they're growing and what the sort of which markets they're targeting. So, we'll probably start back at agronomy, what's going to work, in their region, what crops, and therefore then whether they need to store them at harvest, or whether they can deliver them at harvest into a local segregation, or if they've got, whether it's something like Faber Beans or something a little bit unique, being able to develop that communication with those markets. Now, if we're wheat, barley and canola, they're sort of readily marketable and can go into the system. But other commodities, sometimes they'll need to have specific infrastructure or develop a plan as far as where it's going to go to. And then it's also understanding what quality it has to be and ensuring that it'll sort of meet in the market. Relative to a drought scenario, it's also being able to monitor that crop. Definitely it's sort of staying away from forward committing, but it's being able to monitor that crop and understanding what production capacity it has, and even being able to make decisions. That's the one thing we saw in drought as well. Those readily prepared to make a decision and commit. Locally, one of the big factors was that we cut a lot of hay, and it was able to result in growers, at least if they weren't making big profit out of it, it would have kept them sort of sustainable in those sorts of scenarios. So it's being able to make those decisions as well.
So I've got another question, given there was a couple of, I think we've answered the questions, have we, Brandon, that we've got so far? Yeah. So I just had another question for Glen. What are you considering any technology on your farm that may help you make your farm more productive or more resilient? Are you considering any new technology?
Look, there's a number of things, I suppose. I mean, FRRR technology, which John Deere and Green Star have made that a lot more possible for us, a lot easier to use, and we've started to do a little bit of that, which obviously there's savings there, which is particularly important in dry times.
So that's variable rate? Variable rate,
yeah, sorry.
Yep.
So some of those maps can be kept pretty simple based off the year before's yield map, and so for phosphorus, it's just to replace what you took out, or gypsum and lime based on, surveys or soil tests. Other things, I guess, irrigation automation is the next step in some of our irrigation layouts. We've already played with it a little bit, and it's friendly to mobile, so you can start and stop water off your phone. Camera sprayers, something we haven't got yet, but now we've got some pretty vast areas of dry land. There'd be some considerable savings, I would think, to be made there in dry times, particularly when you don't need to spray, perhaps a blanket spray the whole field. It's worth considering one of them for sure. I would think that's the main things that come to mind.
Actually, I think we did have a chat earlier. I'm not sure if you mentioned it, but did you say you've recently changed your seeding equipment?
Yeah, we have. We've had the current seeders for a couple of years now, yes. But they're relatively new. We used to have Jenke bars, and now we've got a Boss tying machine and an NDF disc, which we've had an NDF disc for a long time, but we've got one of the newer models, although there's a newer model again now, I think. And they are particularly good at sowing into minimal moisture, particularly the NDF I'm talking about, and it needs a lot less rain to get it going. Just doesn't create those clods, etc., that you get from a time machine. You just get nice fine dirt, so a little bit less rain can get a crop up and going. And yeah, we've changed the operation of the equipment that operates it from Trimble to Green Star, which I did mention earlier, but that's just seems a lot more user friendly. It's better supported because John Deere have now got a tech site, so anyone can ring up for 15 hours a day, and half the time they can solve your problem over the phone, which is just so important now.
So I think, yeah, the after sales service, so we can have all the technology in the world, but if we haven't got someone to help us when it's not working,
no,
that's a bit of a barrier.
I mean, we've still got plenty of Trimble equipment operating, our boom sprays, etc., and that's all working fine. But certainly when it comes to the seeders, Green Star seems to be the go.
And so just on you're saying the disc planter works well in a dry season. So where do you use the disc as opposed to the tine? Is that a crop specific thing or a logistics or?
Well, yeah, it is a little bit. So for example, this year the barley was all same with our Boss air seeder. We had a little mishap with a chemical called Overwatch last year. So we've gone away from that, and we're just using Avedex and Trifluor, and obviously that needs to be done with a tine machine.
Right,
and,
so it gets down to a herbicide safety.
Pretty much, but
Yeah.
On the other side with the disc is we also use the disc on canola, particularly when there's minimal moisture, which hasn't been an issue this year. So they both did plenty of canola, but the NDF does travel at 12 to 14 k's an hour as opposed to the other one doing, say, 9 or 10. So it gets across more country naturally anyway.
So that's on a canola stubble?
No, well, it does sow into canola stubbles, but no, I was just talking about planting canola,
yeah.
dryland canola.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's interesting. So because I think there's always a lot of debate on the tines versus the disc. So
and
good to get your insights on that.
Yeah, well, I think I saw a little bit of difference this year. The tine machines seem to get out of the ground a little bit quicker, but you wouldn't know the difference now. A month later, you wouldn't know. The disc looks every bit as good as where the tine machine's been. And I think if it had been a dry start, the disc machine would have looked better.
So I think Rhiannon's got a couple more questions, so I'll hand over to you, Rhi.
Thanks, Kate. This is a little bit of a fun question, I guess, for both of you. But if you had sort of a funding source with a potential amount of money, what do you both see as an area that is potentially untapped, or we could look at putting research into at the current time with what's happening in the world? And I'll give you some time to think if you need. And yeah, Kate, if you had anything else you wanted to add on that sort of type of question.
I love that question, Rhi.
I think one of the Achilles heel of a lot of the commodities we grow is logistics. It's access to port, particularly in a big year, but droughts tend to turn the whole thing upside down. So in a year like the last couple of years, you talk about port infrastructure, you talk about rail infrastructure and the efficient use, but then you get into a drought scenario and it really does get turned upside down, and we see grain going from here up to the north coast of New South Wales. We see all these sorts of things. So maybe in line with that, maybe it's inland rail. We'll have that capacity to turn things around a little bit. But as far as a return for growers on a larger level, and definitely listening to what Glen's sort of saying, being able to have the right seeding gear and it's just such a fundamental to get that start. In a good season, it's not so critical, but in dry season, it makes a difference. But if it was bottomless pockets and Mr. Albanese was seeing what he could do for agriculture, that's probably the one I'd be sort of looking at. Even if it doesn't provide it in a drought year, if it provides the good, a benefit in the good times, it probably will have a long-term benefit.
Yeah. From my point of view, I suppose, not that it's untapped, but automation or autonomous equipment, particularly with labour shortage and becoming more of a problem, I know it's in the pipeline, but it's still probably a fair way off. But John Deere certainly looked to be leading the charge. We're setting up fields and boundaries and ready for an autonomous vehicle to come in and tow our air seeder or spray our paddock, and whether it be also drone technology or just vehicles doing the job without the need for extra labor, I suppose.
Well,
Thanks.
I've got you, Glenn. Oh, sorry, Kate.
Yeah, no, you go.
I've just had one more question come through for Glenn. Thank you both for sharing that. This one, Glenn, is about fertiliser this year. Obviously, there has been quite high input prices, specifically with your FRRR. And, you said you're getting the most out of your good years. In a year like this, have you sort of pushed your rates further, or have you brought them back because of the cost? And are you using any fertigation with your irrigation setups?
So, yes, we have brought our rates back a little bit throughout the summer. We did buy all our urea for the summer crop prior to the prices skyrocketing or doubling. But leading into this winter crop, we have been a bit conservative early on. But that's both because of the price and the ability to actually get the job done. But and yes, we do water run liquid urea, and we also drop urea into the water to run down with our irrigations through the cotton and the corn. But I think urea prices are going to come off a little bit from what I've heard and seen, and with current grain prices, I don't, and current moisture profile, I don't see this year changing. We'll just go ahead with our normal rates.
Glenn, I think earlier, Adrian, did you have a comment on the urea price?
Like I had heard it sort of come off, but it's definitely in line with what Glenn's saying. It's that case of you can't afford to put it on, but you definitely can't afford not to put it on. When you look at these values and the fact that with the moisture, it would be a different decision if we were a drier start and we weren't seeing the same values, but with the opportunity in front of us, yeah. But no, Glenn would be closer to it than I, but I do understand, yeah, we had seen it coming off a little bit. The US was reporting that theirs was coming off because of slow corn plantings, but that doesn't so much affect our crop at this point in time.
Ree, do you have another question there?
Yes, thank you, Kate. The next one is about the use of data, Glenn specifically, with your variable rate data and your mapping. Can it be difficult to get everyone to manage all of that data, or do you sort of understand exactly what's happening in all of those spaces? And did you get any training and that sort of stuff? Like, how has your service providers assisted you with your data management?
Yeah, so no, it is a bit difficult, particularly running two different types of machinery. I mean, I can see why there's lots of farmers out there just run all green, because the JD Op Centre is probably the easiest way to do VRA that I've seen. Yeah, so basically I do manage a fair bit of it, but we haven't quite got it right yet because we're relying on case data to come into John Deere and then come out again as a VRA map, and that's got its challenges.
So do you have someone that helps you with that, Glenn? Do you have
Oh, well, it's really the JD tech site.
Yeah,
I'd probably say. So the staff that Hutchin and Pearce put on to run that tech site, if I've got an issue or I'm unsure how to do something, I just give them a call. They jump on, they remote log into my computer or the tractor and say, press this, do that. And we can usually get it done. But there is a program within the JD Op Centre called Agrian, which allows you to pull data out of your various passes from different fields in the Op Centre, whether it be speed, whether it be terrain or yield mapping, and you can pull that in and use that to manage or create that particular VRA map for whatever product you're using. And then once that map's created, it's just a few presses of buttons and change the legend. You can export it and then send it out to whichever machine that you want it to be in.
Thanks, Glenn.
Sorry.
I think we're really probably pushing you tonight with this. Yeah, you're not being so well. So I just wanted to put out there to just see if there's any final questions for either Glenn or Adrian. But just while I'm speaking and waiting to see if there's any more questions, just wanted to put out there, Glenn, we've been talking a lot about, you know, farm level stuff that people can do, but I'm just interested, obviously you're part of a community there at Jerilderie. What do you think as a community that the community can be doing to help us better prepare for drought? And it might be a question for Fiona as well, if she's still there.
She ran away actually, but it probably would have been better for her. But yeah, look, like communities are a good place to go during the tough times, I suppose. The sporting culture and people getting together in town probably brings everyone together and takes the pressure off, I suppose, for a while. So I think it's important to get off the farm in these times and even just take a holiday. It's one of the best times to go on holidays during a drought. It's hard to get away from these sorts of farms when it's in full production.
Yeah.
But so I think you've just got to go and mix with the community and get away from it. But as far as what they can do, I mean, I think that there's various things always happening in the community. It's just a matter of making yourself a part of it.
That's a great point, I think. Just making the effort, even when you don't feel like it.
Yes, yeah, that's right. Like Fiona, my wife, actually, she takes some community-run gym classes in town. That's just one example. And obviously, you know, there's football and netball and golf and all sorts of things.
Yeah, and it's a great outlet, you know, whether it's social or sporting or whatever, and a great sort of habit to get into so that you do have that time away from the business and away from the day-to-day.
Yeah.
Yeah, so I think, you know, we can talk all about on-farm, but sometimes we've got to think about, the wider off-farm and just, you know, looking after ourselves as well.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah. Okay, did we have any more questions, Ree, or are we done? Okay, no worries. Well, I might wind it up there, and I'd really like to thank the input from our speakers this evening, Fiona and Glen Baxter and Adrian Clancy, and also my co-host Rhiannon. Now, just on the subject of, I think you mentioned the camera sprayers, Glenn, we will be having one of them at our expo, one of the green on brown sprays, the Weed It.
Okay.
So yeah, come along to our expo. That's just a little ad. Yep. And another ad just to put out there that we will be running 3 more webinars over the next 3 Tuesday nights. Next week will be soils, and we will have Nick Ennis and also Dr. Kirsten Barlow from Precision Ag. So that'll be a great sort of chat on soils, and it's interesting how Nick Ennis at his organisation have been focusing on soils as a strategy to improve their business. The following week, we will be having livestock, and that's going to be about planning for your lambs. So, Glenn, this might be a good one. Is it for your dad that does the sheep side of business?
Yeah, we've got a plan for him.
I know. And the final one, so that will be the livestock one. And then the final one, which will be hosted by Rhiannon, will be on ag tech, and we'll be looking at a couple of exciting ag tech companies, including Pear Tree, which the aim of which is to bring all your data together. So that might be a good one, Glenn, for all your
good one, yes,
data that you're collecting. And also talking to the drone lady and the farmer that's using drones to do some of their livestock work. So we've got some really exciting topics coming along. So if you're free the next 3 Tuesday nights at 8 p.m, we'll be sending out some more info. So thank you very much again. Watch out on the socials for those upcoming events. And I'll like to close it there and just remind you, hopefully the survey will pop up on your screen if you could complete that for us. So thank you very much, everyone, and I hope you get better soon, Glenn.
Yeah, thanks, Kate.
No worries. Thank you.
Thanks, Kate.
Thanks, Adrian. Thanks, Ray. Bye.